I swear I don't try to make controversial videos on this channel, but if you look at the last time I uploaded a JoJo journal, it's been a while, and that's because part 4 has been really hard to watch. It's just not as good.
HJ Review.
Welcome back, Classic Crew, to another JoJo journal where I talk about my experiencing JoJo in all of its glories. So if you've been along the whole JoJo ride so far on this channel, it's been this mountain that's been going up. I fell in love with the series of part 1. I was like, this is so weird. Part 2 just kept giving more and blowing my mind. And then part 3 was kind of that crescendo. And I was like, where do you go from here? And apparently the only place you can go is down. So part 4, I just want to put out there, is my least favorite JoJo part. And I've heard I think this is, I don't know if this is the controversial take, because from what I heard from the JoJo fans I know, part 4 seems to be a favorite for many. But a lot of people seem to acknowledge the pacing issue in part 4. And part 4 is Diamond is Unbreakable is the name of it. And I'm just going to be talking about the elements of the story, the characters, what it is I didn't like and what it is I did like, and how it compares to the rest. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so if you want to watch JoJo Part 4 and you haven't yet, you should not watch this video. You should go watch that. All I can say is if you have not watched any JoJo, watch Part 1, 2, 3, and then make your own decision on Part 4. Now, if you've already watched Part 4, I invite you to drop some comments on your experience of this down below and let me know what you thought. But let's get started. So we get introduced to this lovely town called Morio, and I love the little jingle from the radio that you hear at the start of almost every episode. It's like Mori, 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 na, na, something like that. Very charming town, and it took me a few episodes to realize that, oh, this is a little bit more of a slice of life type of anime, where we're not going on a grand adventure, we're not following this hero that's going to be overtaking a great villain. We're just going to cover these little stories that go on in this town. And I can get behind that, but it does take a huge drawback from everything else JoJo has set up. So it's a lot slower, cool pace for the series. Now, in terms of the characters, let's talk about our core cast of characters. So right away, I had now developed a bond with Jotaro after not liking Jotaro, but we went through the whole Egypt arc, and he turned out to be a pretty cool guy by the end. And just as I get attached to him, we're now passing the torch to a new character called Josuke, the new JoJo of this series. And that's some pretty big shoes to fill. Like, you're already talking about, you got Jonathan, and then you got Joseph, who is way better than Jonathan. And then you got Jotaro, which was not as good, but he kind of turned out cool. So you got 3 strong JoJos to follow up with. And then it goes Josuke, a high school student with a weird obsession with his hair. The character Josuke, very cool that he has, Diamond is Unbreakable. I like that he is this child of Joseph, and he's a cool character, but he's not an interesting character. There is nothing. The most interesting aspect we get of Josuke is how he deals with his relationship with Joseph when Joseph finally shows up on the show. And you're seeing that this is a father he's never met. He clearly feels that he needs to build a relationship with him, but he doesn't know how to deal with it. And it is not explored very much outside of 2 or 3 episodes. And then it is highlighted again in the final episode when he basically cons money out of Joseph. And that is about as far interesting as Josuke gets. But he's not boring by any means. I just feel there was a lot of lost potential. We also got some backstory on why he's so obsessed with his hair, but that doesn't make sense at all. I was wondering if they were going to explain how he saw a character that looked like him as a kid, if that was maybe related to a time travel mechanic or something, but no, it never gets acknowledged how he sees himself as a kid. We're just not going to acknowledge that unless it gets acknowledged later. So that's really all I have to say about Josuke. He's not cool. He's definitely not my favorite JoJo. He's not lame or anything. He's just kind of there. I do love the fact that he can heal things. I love his stand, but I don't have much more to say about that. Very funny to see Jotaro ends up being like a marine biologist or something. Out of all things, that's what he grows up to be. That was a fun twist at the beginning. Next, we get Koichi, which I will argue is probably more the main protagonist of the show, because this kid gets so much screen time. And I really don't like Koichi. I really don't think he's an interesting character. He gets probably the most growth in the show, but most of his scenes is him just yelling. He's constantly yelling about what's going on, and it's not like I don't know, it's not like an "oh no" yell from like Joseph. It's a whiny yell, which kind of sounds like what I'm doing right now. So yeah, he has a stand that evolves. That's interesting. He grows as a character, which to some extent it's interesting, but I was like betting on Josuke, and I wanted more screen with Josuke, and every time the show's like, no, we're going to focus on Koichi, I was like, why are we still focusing on this kid? I don't want to focus on this kid. He's a side character. Let's go back to Josuke. But they just kept gravitating there, and I think I was resisting that, and I wasn't letting the show take me where it wanted to, and I just didn't like fighting with it. Its stand was also weird, like the whole evolution of it. First, its sounds can do things, and then I actually forgot what the second form can do, but then it just ends up being like a gravity well creator, which that's a cool element. The pacing is weird. You got way too much Koichi, and in the end, the final arc, where things actually got good. So out of 40 episodes, I would say the best that the series gets is in the final quarter. People say it's the second half. I disagree. It's the last quarter of this series, which means 3/4 of this show is really hard to watch. And Koichi doesn't even really do anything in the final quarter. Then you got Okuyasu, which is Josuke's best friend, or turns out to be his best friend eventually. Interesting character, really interesting stand. The guy can friggin' manipulate like time and space and just eat away space. And I feel that it's never really properly explored, and he's never a key character. Now you could say it's because he's dumb, and the show reminds you constantly how dumb he is. But it just seems like such a lost opportunity that they could have used him more. And he felt like kind of I don't know, what do you call that? A shoehorned in character that was just showed up when needed for very key specific things. And then we have Rohan, which I will argue is the most interesting of the side character. He's a freaking manga artist. He's rich, he's young and rich, very successful, and he doesn't like people. Rohan is probably the most multifaceted character out of the crew. And I can't criticize Jotaro because Jotaro doesn't get much screen time. He's already developed and he's interesting. But Rohan does not get that much screen time, but I really thought he was an interesting character. And then finally we get Yoshikage Kira, which is the villain of the show, who is a wonderful villain, way more interesting than any of the heroes. It's really interesting that this villain is not, scheming to take over the world. He doesn't have mass ambitions. He's just a guy who can't help himself from murdering women. And he just wants to live in peace. He just wants to wake up at like 7, have his breakfast, go to work, have a very quiet evening, and go to bed. And that's all he wants. And he has to get caught up in all of this because he can't resist the urge to murder. That is such a poetic, fantastic way to write a villain. I love it. And he's an intelligent villain that, he's been so diligent, and then he makes a mistake, which leads to the whole final arc of this series. And you can really see how he and his stand, like to what lengths he goes to try to get back just some normalcy in his life. He's a fantastic villain. I love that part of him. So yeah, just overall, slower pacing for storytelling, not as interesting characters to work with, just makes this just feel all just kind of bland. And like I said, at some point I was like, why am I even going to watch a JoJo episode today if it feels like, and I kept comparing this to Power Rangers. So as a kid, I watched a lot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And there would be key elements in the plot, like when they introduced the Green Ranger, or, when big things would happen that would shake up the plot of Power Rangers. But otherwise, you would pretty much sign up every day. You would get the villain that would send out a villain for the Power Rangers to fight. The Power Rangers would fight them first in their suits. Then they would they would fight normal. Then they would morph. And then the villain would grow the monster into a big thing. Then they'd summon the Zords, and then they would kill it. It was so formulaic, but I don't know. I loved it as a kid. But with JoJo, maybe as an adult, I saw the same formula where it's like, oh, today is just a random day in town of Morio, and we are going to fight a random stand. And it got especially worse when we got introduced to Kira's father, who literally spends every episode just being like, today we're going to make a new stand user, you, and it shoots a bow, and that's it. It's like, okay, this is the stand of the day, now kill him. Sure, it's interesting to see what the new stands are, but it doesn't move the whole plot forward, which I feel that is what kept me disengaged from the show. And in the final quarter, which I say is the good part, is because I actually binge those final 10 episodes in one night, because the plot just kept advancing and moving on. And you're like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Whereas the first front of it is pretty much, I'd say the first quarter is introducing you to all the characters. And then you get just and then it's just stand filler. What can we do with stands? And there's a lot of cool concepts that I could explore, but I just don't feel like it's worth it. And none of it ties to anything. Jotaro's there just because he's looking after, like he's tracing the bow that Dio had, but we never even learn what the bow, where it came from, what its history is, how it makes stands. And in the end, is the bow just absorbed into the villain? Is that thing gone? So there's like no overarching theme that ties it all together besides stands and Jotaro. And it's even worse because I took a peek at what part 5, like where it goes to, because I'm like, oh, do I have to sit through all this? And already part 5 ties everything back because they're like, oh yeah, Dio had a son, and now we're going to go look at his story, and now we're in Italy. And I'm like, oh my God. But then they freaking brought Koichi in the first episode. I was like, don't tell me Koichi's going to be a critical aspect of part 5. I'm not looking forward to that. But I'm already invested because they're like, oh, remember Dio? Here's his son. And you're like, why does he have a son? Is he going to be evil? Is he going to be good? How's that going to play with the JoJos? What's going to happen? I'm already invested from episode 1 versus part 4. I really didn't care other than, oh, are they going to bring back, what are we going to do with Jotaro? Are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see Joseph again? Like that buildup of bringing Joseph back into town. And then they did nothing with him. He was just this old man. And then he found an invisible baby. I'm like, what's this invisible baby? Why did they bring this into the story? They never acknowledge it again. Even in the final episode, they're like, we will never know what happened to this invisible baby. Just like, was there a plan with this show? Or was he just like, here's some money to make more JoJo, and he just pumped out a bunch of stands? Because this is like the black sheep of JoJo so far. I've been enjoying my ride, but this was the bump. This was hard. Part 5, episode 1 is already hooking me in, so I hope it's going to be a lot better. Part 6 just came out, so I've got 2 more parts to look forward to watching, and then I think I'm going to have to go into the manga to get the rest of it. So I hope it gets better from here. I know JoJo can be better. Let me know what you think, if part 4 was a favorite, not favorite, what it's like in your friend circles. Is it controversial, or is it widely loved, widely hated? I'd love to read those comments. Otherwise, I will see you on the next JoJo Journal once I finish part 5. And until next time, Classy Crew, keep it classy.